next up, we have a talk by Anya Combs, who has been active in the digital game space for a decade, and she is now working as a global games outreach lead at Kickstarter, meaning she works directly with the people who put the project on Kickstarter and are hopefully successful. And she will, together with us, examine some of the projects that she worked on and some of the creators and look at success factors and how it is possible that they were backed in the end. So please welcome her to stage.
Hi, can you all hear me? Cool. Let me fire up my speaker notes on my laptop, because technology. Cool, hi. How's everybody doing? Everybody good? Everybody had a good lunch? Awesome. Well, thank you to the organizers of Womenize for having me. I'm super excited to chat with you all today. I wanted to just kind of start this presentation by giving you a little bit of information about myself. So my name is Anya. That's like Tanya without the T, easiest way to remember it. It's not a super common name in the US, so I like to remind people of that. I've been in games, in the digital game space for 10 years. This is actually my 10th anniversary, which is really exciting. I started in San Francisco, where I'm from, the San Francisco area, working for a Flash game website called addictinggames.com. Has anybody heard of it? Nice, cool, like 3 of you. Great, that is super uncommon, and I love it. So I did developer relations at Addicting Games for about 5 or 6 years. That was sort of my main focus, but I also did things like social media and blog posting, and at one point I was like stuffing packages with t-shirts. It was a very strange and fun time in the Flash days. And then I had the opportunity to move out to New York because Addicting Games was actually owned by Nickelodeon, so subsequently they were owned by Viacom. So they wanted to shut down our San Francisco office, and so they said, you can move out to New York or take some money. And I was like, New York, obviously. So I moved out to New York to work at the corporate office, where I basically ran addictinggames.com. Very strange to be running a website, but also very fun and chaotic. That might be in itself a completely separate talk. And about a year and a half in, hi. I feel like I need to pose. About a year and a half in, Viacom decided to sell Addicting Games from underneath the Nickelodeon brand and the Viacom brand in general to a company named Defy Media. So I was moved over to a mobile publishing kind of new division, so I have a weird history of like a year and a half of working in mobile development and mobile publishing and mobile production. And after about a year and a half, I was like, you know what, this corporate thing is not for me. I hate it. So I started looking for new opportunities, and this games outreach lead position sort of came across my eye, and I was like, oh, cool, so that's definitely my dream job. And I applied thinking like, oh, I'll never hear back, and sure enough, I did, and I've been the games outreach lead person at Kickstarter for almost 2.5 years, and it's been awesome, and I could not be happier. So leading into Kickstarter, how many people have heard of Kickstarter? Cool, cool, again. Good to ask. Sometimes people are like, what's that? And I'm like, how do I explain crowdfunding? How many people have run a Kickstarter project? Oh, wow, cool, okay. How many people came here today because they were like, I'm thinking of running a Kickstarter project? Oh my gosh, look at all those hands. That's awesome, cool, 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 cool. So to give you a little bit of information about Kickstarter, so our mission is essentially to bring creative projects to life, and we do that by connecting people to the projects that they love. So if you are someone that's like, I'm looking for this really specific RPG game, but I don't know where to look for it, probably on Kickstarter. If you're looking for like a bespoke oven mitt, might be on Kickstarter. It's pretty cool. And we definitely like to think that we do that better than anyone, which is pretty exciting. In 2015, we reincorporated as a benefit corporation. Does anybody know what that is? I know Luke does. So a benefit corporation, benefit corporations are for-profit companies that need to consider the impact of their decisions on society and not just the shareholders. So basically what we do is we donate 5% of our annual profits to arts and music education, which is great. And it makes coming to work really rewarding and fulfilling. One of the cool things about Kickstarter is the community that's behind Kickstarter. So people from nearly every country on Earth have backed a project on Kickstarter, which is huge to think about, literally a global community. Our community basically represents nearly every country and all 7 continents, even Antarctica. And all I want to know is the people on Antarctica that are like, I'm back in Kickstarter projects. That's super interesting to me. So if we break that down into numbers, again, Kickstarter has the largest and most engaged funding community. This 14 million is actually a little bit closer to 14.5 million people that have backed a Kickstarter project, which is fantastic. And 42 million pledges have been made to all projects on Kickstarter, which is huge. That's a lot of people. Kickstarter backers have already pledged $3.6 billion. Just a quick note that this is the only US dollar I'll be using, so everything else moving forward will be in euro because I'm in Europe, and it's great. Over 142,000 creative projects have been funded on Kickstarter out of this $3.6 billion, which is amazing. But because my focus is games, I wanted to focus a little bit more on the games community before I talk about the 5 projects that are near and dear to my heart, run by 5 women creators. So 653 million euro have been pledged to Kickstarter, which is a lot of money. That also means that's a lot of people, which means that's a huge community on Kickstarter. I mean, we can see these numbers, right? Like 2.8 million backers. That's pretty fantastic and impressive. The way that we kind of look at games on Kickstarter is sort of 2 categories. We look at video games and we look at tabletop. There's a couple other small subcategories like live action role-playing games or LARP, which I think are so cool, but I'm too terrified to ever try one. But for the purposes of this presentation, just to focus on video games and tabletop games, as those are the 2 categories I'll be talking about, highlighting the 5 projects. So $176 million pledged to video games, 1.5 million backers. This is over 10,000 projects launched, which is a lot of projects on Kickstarter. And I want to just call attention quickly to this 1.5 million backers because when we look at tabletop games, while tabletop games is giant on Kickstarter and very much a juggernaut and a lot of money has been pledged, there's actually more backers in video games than there is in tabletop games, which is sort of a weird, interesting space. So it's kind of fun to think about that community as a whole and very exciting. So games last year, we had one of our best years ever with a bananas number of euros pledged. There were over 7,000 projects launched and 767,000 backers in games of 2017. And when we actually broke those numbers out, it turns out that almost every single day, with the exception of, I can't remember exactly how many days, I think it was like 7 days, a video game funded on Kickstarter every single day, which is huge. And then I believe it was like 5.4 or 5.5 tabletop games funded every single day in 2017. So the community is just growing. There's more games. There's more people. It's really fantastic. So learning all of this, what makes a good project, right? Like what makes something that's cool and interesting and informative for people to want to back a project on Kickstarter? So I'm going to be highlighting 5 projects. All of these projects were essentially either run by all women or women-led, which is really cool. So the first project is a video game by the name of Quench. This was run by a team called Axon Interactive, run by a woman named Tabby Rose, based in Toronto, Canada. I found this just kind of like looking around on the Kickstarter site. As much as we would love to know every single game that's on Kickstarter or every single game that will be coming to Kickstarter, it's not possible. We're a very, very small team, so we do our best, but sometimes stuff does kind of slip between our fingers, and I'm super thankful this was not one of those situations. You can see it's kind of a fun, like, isometric exploration video game. It's kind of like Minecraft with animals. So I definitely would encourage you to check it out. So these are some of the numbers behind Quench. So the game funded on May 20th, 2016. It actually funded on the absolute last day it could possibly fund, which is awesome. Tabby really worked extremely hard. And so one of the things that she did is because she lives in Toronto, she had access to a lot of the East Coast. So she was able to attend Indiecade East, which was held in New York City, in Queens, and also PAX East in Boston. So one of the things that Tabby was extremely successful in was really growing her community and doing her outreach. She had a bit of notoriety on Twitter as an artist and as a games creator, but she really leveraged that by attending PAX East and Indiecade by showing the game off as much as she could. She didn't have a booth. She just walked around and talked to people. She handed out business cards. She collected business cards. She really, really grew her community pretty organically, which is absolutely fantastic. And one of the common themes with all of these projects, with maybe the exception of one or two, is project anxiety. So if your project doesn't fund immediately, even though you have 30 to 35 days, pretty much every single creator will get frantic emails, sometimes texts, sometimes even phone calls, asking why their project isn't funding and what can they do and what can happen. And I'll talk about this at the end, but one of the things that we try to tell people is your project probably is not going to fund on the first day, and that's okay. So the second project is a little bit near and dear to my heart. So this is a super fun card game called Someone Has Died. It's sort of for folks that are trying to dip their toes into the world of RPGs through improv. It's super fun. It's super cute. It's very esoteric and fun. The woman who I've been mostly in contact with is a woman by the name of Adi. She and 3 of her friends decided to create this fun card game. I think they're all under the age of 25 and they live in New York City. So I was doing a presentation at this organization by the name of Playcrafting, which is basically a games educator. And Adi came and spoke with me after. This was in 2016, and she said, "We want to come to Kickstarter. We have a card game. What do we need to do?" So we actually worked together for, I think, almost a full year before she launched her project. She worked extremely hard, and working on this for a year was a bit of a labor of love with her. And it paid off because she funded in 5 days. They actually funded at 348%, which is huge. They met every single stretch goal with the exception of one stretch goal, which is absolutely amazing. And one of the things similar to Tabby that Adi and Liz and her team did is they did a lot of outreach. So they were able to showcase their game at events like PAX West, PAX East. I don't believe they were at Indiecade, but I do know that they were very active within the New York City game space and showing the game off as much as they could. They also were showing the game off to as many sort of influential people within the tabletop space as they could. So they just really hit that sweet spot of oh, this is someone I should be showing the game to. Let's make sure we talk to each other and get each other's contact information. And I mean, it obviously paid off. They also had, over 1,700 backers for not only a first-time games creator, but also a first-time Kickstarter creator. So I couldn't be prouder of them. I'm also very honored to say that they've become good friends of mine. So it's a project that's very dear to my heart. And it's coming out in August of this year, so you should definitely buy it and play it. So the third project I wanted to talk about is a project that is called, it's kind of got 2 names. It's either Nasty Woman or Nasty Feminist. So the woman behind this project, her name is Amanda Brinkman. She is the creator of that iconic T-shirt that happened in the US during our unfortunate election. She created the shirt that had the heart that said Nasty Woman on it. And it went super viral. I think even celebrities like Katy Perry were wearing it at Hillary Clinton rallies. And she really was instrumental in sort of raising a lot of money for Hillary's campaign. So with that notoriety of being the woman who created the Nasty Woman t-shirt, she also had a little bit of an interesting time with the alt-right, shall we say. So she had a couple articles written about her. She had been doxxed by Breitbart and a couple other publications. So with her coming to Kickstarter, she was a little bit nervous about any sort of backlash that could potentially happen. The other very interesting thing about this project that I was super interested in is, while Amanda had notoriety within a specific community, namely the activist community, she didn't have any notoriety within the games community. So I was curious to know how that sort of transition from having a very, very active community in political activism would transfer over to games. And this was sort of a challenge for her. She did fund, similar to Quench. She funded on the absolute last day, and we were a little bit nervous, but she did an incredible job. She also didn't use her full name. She only used her first name. So she didn't leverage her community as much as maybe she initially thought she would, because she was a little bit nervous that she would be doxxed again. So it was a really interesting project to kind of work on, but she did an incredible job, and I couldn't be prouder of her. Fourth project, Bodice. Does anybody know this project? I think Michael does, yeah. Bodice is super cool. Philomena, who is one of the people at Strayfawn Studios? Yeah, Strayfawn Studios. She actually came to Kickstarter a couple years ago for a project called Niche. And she did an incredible job. She's a great games creator. She's very smart. She understands the platform very well. So if anybody is thinking of running a project on Kickstarter, specifically a video game, I'd be happy to connect you with her. She's just great. So there are a couple things about this project that I thought would be a little bit challenging. One, Philomena decided to launch around a time that we typically say, hey, you might want to think about delaying until next year. And that's specifically the holidays in the US, so like November, December. Secondly, Philomena had to create a completely separate profile, because the project that was run under Niche, they had a new studio, so they had to create a brand new Kickstarter profile. So I was very curious to see how all of those initial backers, would they transfer over to this new project? And they definitely did. She was extremely successful despite having very little editorial support from our side, just because it was towards the end of the year. So she actually funded on my birthday of last year, so I was like, that's a cool birthday gift for myself. With over 2,800 backers, which is absolutely fantastic. So I think there's a lot kind of going on with this project. Number one, if you have a community that you build, they will follow you. At least for Philomena they did, which is pretty cool. So she did a really good job of letting her community know ahead of time, hey, we're gonna be launching this project, but we're gonna be launching it at this date under this name. So it's pretty exciting to see. And also, like, the game looks incredible. Like, that's so badass. And then the last project I wanted to highlight is this kind of weird, dirty point-and-click adventure game called Perfect Tides by a woman named Meredith Gran out of Philadelphia. This was also something that I just kind of saw digging around, searching for projects, and it really reminded me of my days in Flash. So there's a little bit of nostalgia for me. This reminded me of these escape games that we used to license all the time, like Escape the Car and Escape the Bathroom, and just a lot of weird, fun games. And similar to Amanda, Meredith is very well known within the comics space. She's a comics artist, and she was just like, I'm gonna make a video game. And I was like, cool. So I was curious to know how her community would respond to a comics artist making a video game. And I think one of the things that's going on here is comics and video games, there's a close relationship there. So the transfer made a lot of sense, maybe a little bit more than political activism transferring over to card games. She did extremely well. She funded on the last day of February this year, and she funded in 18 days, and she funded at like 177%. So she leveraged her community in very, very smart ways. She had a great number of backers, and she just kind of kicked ass, which is really exciting. And again, like, who doesn't want to play this? I don't know what's happening, but I do know I want to be a part of it. So to kind of wrap this all up, I'd say there's 5 things to think about when you're launching a Kickstarter project. I think you heard me say community probably about 100 times in the 20 minutes or so that I've been talking. Community and outreach are key. Do it early and do it often. We try to say like 3 to 6 months before you launch your project, but in the case of someone has died, a D took an entire year. So the more you do it, the more it's gonna pay off. You also don't need to fund on your day one. This is a weird rumor that I hear a lot. If you don't fund on your first day, you're not gonna fund. Okay, well, if that was the case, we would say just run a one-day project. There's a reason we tell people, like, think 30 to 35 days to run your project. The first 2 days are extremely important, but also the last 2 days are just as important. So you don't need to fund on day one. It's okay. You have time. And one of the things that I just, like, couldn't figure out how to put into this presentation, but something I did want to highlight, are updates. So updates we tell people for games, and it's different across every category on Kickstarter. I just learned recently that for music, you're, like, they tell their community update like every week, and I was like, oh my God, I can't even believe that, because we tell our community you should update essentially every other day. I would definitely encourage you to check out the updates from Someone Has Died. They were very smart about the way they did things. They really got their community involved in their updates, and they understood how to make updates exciting and compelling. Your video. So every single picture here is from that initial shot on Kickstarter, that initial image. And so you would have, like, it would say play before your video starts. That main image is extremely important. It says a lot to people. So definitely think about your video and that main project image. Your video, though, however, on top of that, so we say your video should be about 2-3 minutes max, and there's 3 things that you really need to have in there. One, gameplay. You need to show gameplay. You can't just say, like, this is what I'm thinking. Like, no, you need to be able to show it. 2, explain who you are. I'm so-and-so, and I've done blah, blah, blah. Maybe don't say that, but something along those lines. And 3, why are you coming to Kickstarter? Why do you want people to be a part of this creative space with you? Why do you want them to go on this weird, crazy journey with you on Kickstarter? And then lastly, like I just said, the main project image. So I hope this has inspired some of you to, like, make the thing, whatever it is. If it's games, if it's, again, like a weird pot holder. I don't know why I'm obsessed with pot holders right now. Whatever. If it's a design and technology thing, whatever the thing is, hopefully you've learned a little bit. You can reach me here. My email address is just anya@kickstarter.com, or you can email our games email address, which is games@kickstarter.com. And if anybody has any questions, I think I have a couple minutes to maybe take a couple.
Yes, we made... We did make good on the few minutes that we started later, so if there are any questions, we could have a few questions, particularly maybe from the people who said that they're here and maybe looking to go on Kickstarter with their projects.
It's also cool if you don't. I know asking questions is super weird in an environment like this, so if you want to email me or if you want to grab me at some point during the week, that's totally fine too. But also, you can ask now. It's up to you. Great. So
okay.
You've learned everything. Good job.
Okay, thanks, Anya.